everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Divorce and Separation Coach podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about legal abuse. Now, we all know there are many types of post-separation abuse, but legal abuse in particular is often overlooked and really not that well understood, actually. So to help us understand what it is, how it happens, how we can fight it, I've invited Lisa Johnson. Lisa is the co-founder of Been There, Got Out. He's a high conflict divorce strategist, a coach, and a certified domestic violence advocate. She's going to tell us about her story, of course, but interestingly, Lisa has successfully represented herself through numerous court appearances, and her case, which was published in the Connecticut Law Journal, is being used as legal precedent. Add to that, her live testimony helped pass Jennifer's Law in Connecticut, and that's the third state in America to expand its legal definition of domestic violence to include coercive control. It's great to have you here today, Lisa. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Chloe. It's so good to be here.
So can you tell us, I've touched a little bit upon your story, but could you tell us what your journey has been and what led you to found Been There, Got Out?
Yeah. Well, I love to say that I never dreamt of being a high conflict divorce strategist as a child.
Yes, it's somehow something kids don't think about.
Yeah, I know. I also never believed that I would get divorced. I was with my ex for 20 years and married for nearly 18 and thought that things were pretty good, with some little weird stuff. And then, of course, after all that time, it became more painful to stay than to go. And it took a couple of years to figure out an exit plan. But we finally got out and I consulted an attorney. And in that first 20 minutes, he said, yours is going to be bad. And I thought that's so weird because I thought, well, my ex is like a good person, but has done some bad things. But my lawyer was very intuitive and he was able to predict. And that's some of the things that we talk about in our book about how the indicators of high conflict divorce.
Yeah.
So he was right. And the divorce actually, which I thought would take a couple months, I thought it would be amicable because at that point we had both my ex and I had agreed that the divorce was imminent. It took a year. It cost about $100,000. And it turned out that that was just part one. So my attorney said, your ex is not going to comply with these orders, which was an agreement. Luckily, we didn't have to go to trial for that. But you need to prepare yourself because you're not going to be able to afford me anymore. He's already decimated you financially. You're going to have to represent yourself and plan for it and start establishing a paper trail. And I'm here if you need me, but we'll probably get you a paralegal, but you're going to have to do it on your own. And so I took about 1 year and 9 months to start putting things together. And when I went back for what's called an educational support order, which is really figuring out how to split college in America because, it's super expensive where we are.
Yeah.
I talked to a volunteer attorney because a lot of American courts have like a pro se help desk, or they have attorneys that they won't take your case, but they can give you quick legal advice. The attorney said, something seems funny here with your divorce. And I think that there's fraud. And so I don't think you should go back for a fraud case, but I think you should go back for a modification in alimony and child support while you're going back for the college order. And so that's what I did. And I did it on my own. Of course, I always got support in the background, but it took about 1 year to get orders and countless court appearances. And my ex didn't comply. And then it took him about 4 years to pay those orders, which was dozens and dozens of court appearances in different states over COVID. He also appealed several times. And like you said, my case was published. That was at the appellate level where I represented myself too. And so I didn't know a word for what I was experiencing with having so many years and having to go to court all the time. And then a few years ago, I learned what legal abuse was from a judge's manual from Washington State that was published in 2015. I'm like, oh, this is my life. Like, this is what it is, because I didn't know other people were going through something like this. And I found out that in America alone, which doesn't include the rest of the world who also deals with it, that there's at least 80,000 people. And I thought, this is something that Chris and I, with Been There, Gone Out, we really need to focus on, because this is my personal experience and I have had success, but it takes such a long time. But it is a type of what we call coercive control. And so I always say I got my education in the trenches, and especially being pro se, but I've in the process post judgment, I know I've saved well over $1 million in representing myself. But legal abuse is a lot of people will call it other names now. When I discovered it, it was nowhere. It was just in that manual. Now it's become like more popular on social media, and I like to think that that I started because I was like, this is my life. Like I
Yeah.
couldn't find anything. But it's also called litigation abuse, judicial terrorism,
Mm.
paper abuse because of all of the filings. And
Yeah.
my favorite is stalking through the court.
Oh.
And so, yeah, and there's different types of legal abuse, but
Mhm.
basically legal abuse is defined as when one person at post separation, usually,
Mhm.
and it can happen obviously during a divorce or custody battle, but where one party weaponizes the legal system by trying to control, harass, intimidate, coerce, or impoverish a victim. And so for me, that means trying to wear the other person down and bleed them
Yeah.
dry financially, which has been my experience. And there's two
Yeah.
ways that legal abuse occurs. One is something called vexatious or frivolous litigation. And that's what many of our clients deal with, where their ex is constantly filing motions and dragging them back to court because they have to respond. So that costs money in
Yeah.
legal fees, in time lost from work, in energy. I
Sure.
mean, it's
Yeah.
so draining and consuming. And then the other part of legal abuse is what I dealt with, where one party is not complying with the law or the agreement. And so then the burden is on someone like me to go to court to get that agreement enforced.
Yeah.
And enforcement is a really tricky thing in America in particular, other parts of the world too, where you just keep going back and then, judges move around and new people take the case and exes hire different attorneys and things just get so crazy. And that's the same thing with the money and time and energy. So it's really
Yeah.
exhausting.
So at the end of the day, you're basically left with a choice of letting it go or continuing to fight and stand up for yourself.
Right. And the problem too with the legal system is that think justice takes such a long time. And I
Mm.
remember arguing, especially towards the end of my case, to a court saying, this court's failure to enforce its own orders has punished my family and I because it's
Yeah.
emboldened the defendant because he's learned that he can get away with it. Because you
Yeah.
guys keep saying, if he doesn't do this, we're going to put him in jail. If he doesn't do this, we're going to give penalties. If he does, but then nothing happens. So now he's not even complying with other parts of the agreement because he's like,
Yeah.
make me do it. Nothing's going
Yeah.
to happen.
He knows he's immune.
Luckily, I finally did get enforcement and compliance big time and some awesome orders. But along the way, there's like the feelings which are characterize people dealing with legal abuse is a sense of rage, injustice, and despair every single day, waking up with the feelings of just how can this be happening? Like, why is the system that I'm turning to for relief re-traumatizing me, like
Yeah.
making
Yeah.
so much worse? And people who don't experience it just can't believe it. And they'll often say things to victims like, well, why doesn't the judge just do this? Or why doesn't your ex just do what's best for the kids? And this happens, according to attorneys, 50-50. It's not a male female thing with legal abuse.
Yeah.
There's so many false allegations. There's so many
Mhm.
ways that kids are weaponized and the
Yeah.
court is weaponized that it's just awful. It's a terrible way to live. And one of the things that Chris and I do with Been There Got Out is we started a weekly legal abuse support group, and we blend our men and women and our clients from all over the world
Yeah.
come because we strongly believe that this is this kind of abuse in particular is a human issue. It's not a gender issue. And it's really helpful for people to not only hear each other's stories, but to provide support and resources for each other.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
love
Absolutely.
love our clients and I love our group and I love seeing them help and support each other.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So what are some of the red flags that people can look out for if they think that potentially they're experiencing legal abuse? What would be some of the indicators?
So I always think back to that initial consult with my attorney when he was like, yours is going to be bad. And I went
Yeah.
back to years later before we wrote the book and said, Eric, like, how did you know? And so I put
Okay.
together a little list. And
Yeah.
one of the things that is an indicator of legal abuse, or at least we'll say high conflict, which means it's going to be long and dragged out,
Yeah.
is when one person has a personality disorder or some type of addiction. Because
Yeah,
people who are addicted or have mental illness have really poor judgment. And I'm not talking about someone in recovery. That's a
yeah,
completely different thing. I'm talking about an active addiction where they cannot figure out things in their own best interests and they
yeah,
don't think about consequences. Because people who use the court to do this are more concerned about punishing another person. And so they end up scorching the earth. They spend hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of
yeah,
dollars just to try to destroy the other person. So that's a signal if they're not even thinking about themselves. Like most
yeah, that's a good
divorces,
point.
yeah. So another thing is anger that does not dissipate. So most
Mm.
people 4 to 6 months, everything starts as high conflict, but you're
Yeah,
spending lots of money, you're like battling over the kids, and then you realize like, okay, we gotta like start moving on with our lives
yeah,
because
yeah,
it's too expensive and it's too much energy. But ours are the cases where they don't calm down. It keeps going. The cases that go on for years and years, like where you see an ex who's still going and still like fighting so much,
they
that's
want to
an
win. Is that
yeah,
they're driven by that need to come out victorious?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So that's another thing is stuff with money where
Mhm.
they're not complying with discovery. Like I'd say pretty much 100%, maybe 98% of our clients, their exes don't comply with discovery, especially money. They
Well,
don't
that's
want
an
to show
early
what they have.
indicator.
Oh yeah,
There you
someone who's
go.
not complying. Because you think about it, when you go to the court or when you go for a divorce or something, everybody has to do what's called financially undressed because the court
Yeah,
is there to help divide the assets and figure out maintenance and child support and whatever. If somebody is not sharing what they have the sense that they're entitled to
hmm,
keeping things for themselves. And one of the quotes I say all the time what's mine is mine and what's yours is mine too.
yeah,
That's the
yeah,
way they feel. It's like they don't care that you've helped raise the kids, that you've, worked and done so many things. It's just like it's mine. It's my money.
yeah,
And these are things I think back to my own relationship where my ex did this while we were still married, where he'd be like, this is my money from my rental income with my sister and your money can pay the bills and then we're going to put my money in my retirement but it's going to be ours and shared, and of course that's not what happened. Yeah, so hidden assets, and
that's
that's just a few of
that's.
some indicators that you could be in for a long difficult battle.
What can you do to protect yourself if you can feel it coming?
That's a great question. I wish I had known then sooner. So, one of the things to do is to choose the proper attorney. The attorney is so important because that's the foundation of your case. So you want to
Yeah,
find somebody who is not high conflict. And Chloe, you and I are both part of the Amicable Divorce
yeah,
Network. And one of the reasons that Chris and I joined as high conflict divorce professionals, which is weird, is because we want to meet others professionals who can help keep our clients out of court. You want to
yeah,
find an attorney that will do everything possible to try to keep you out of court because when you end up in court, then a third party who's a stranger is making
yeah,
significant decisions about your life. One
yeah,
of the things that you have to do from the moment you're considering separating is to come up with ideas for a parenting plan. And we always say that's going to be your constitution, especially if you have children. Well,
yeah.
if you have children,
Children.
you don't need a parenting plan if you're just separating or divorcing. But a parenting plan is everything. It's not just the schedule. You have to consider so many things like regarding the schedule, access, vacations, significant decisions, legal decisions, traditions that matter to you and your family
Yeah,
that a judge would never think about, especially if there's cultural differences. I mean, there's so many things that people don't realize. You have to
yeah,
not just consider what's happening when, your child is at the stage they're at when you're separating, but for until they're at least 18, you have to think about college, how all kinds of things are going to be handled. And so it's important to start planning that early on. So finding an attorney who is also who's skilled in parenting plans and skilled in high conflict and
hmm,
knowing how to manage their own emotions, not
yeah,
fueling your emotions, but being very businesslike and understanding what you're up against is
yeah,
really, really important because people, I always say like when we do an initial call with someone, we figure out like what's going on and where they are in the process. And if
Mhm.
they're at the very beginning, we call them our babies. And we say, you are like terrified and overwhelmed, and it's so scary, but you have more power than you will ever have because you haven't made any of the expensive mistakes yet. So this is an opportunity to get it right from the beginning. Like choose an
Mhm.
attorney who has certain skills. Ask the question. This is my favorite one, and this is in our book too. Like, how would you handle a case like mine? And the
Mhm.
reason that's my favorite is it's not saying, do you have experience with narcissists, which everyone's like, yeah, I hear that all the time.
Yeah, they all say yes.
They're all going to say yes. Or they'll say, I deal with everything, which doesn't tell you anything. But if you say, how would you handle a case like mine? Number one, it's showing that they're actually paying attention to what you have said to them about what's happening with your family. And number two, it gives them an opportunity to give you a strategy of how they handle people like this, because it's very, very different than a
Yeah,
normal divorce. And it's only a small percentage, realistically. Again, everybody throws around the term narcissist, borderline, whatever. But as time passes, lawyers see like which are the ones that are really the problem, and most of them are
yeah,
not. So you
yeah.
need somebody who is experienced, very like socially and emotionally intelligent. And
Mhm.
one of the things that's great, unfortunately, um, high conflict people tend to attract lawyers like themselves. But if
That's
they
the
don't,
problem. Yeah,
if you can get them into a process where they choose a good attorney or an attorney that can work well with your attorney, you don't need to have a high conflict divorce
yeah, yeah. The
because
attorneys play a
those
massive role.
professionals, yeah, they
Absolutely.
can work together to protect their clients and not fuel the fight.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think that's probably one of the most important things, and also get support because this is gonna be a long haul, and, part of we talk about how our clients are like the top of a table, and so they
Mhm.
need as many le not as many, but, like, solid legs to keep them as stable as possible. So friends
Yeah.
and family, if you have them, great, they love you, they support you, but they often don't quite understand, and we don't want them to turn into what we call barstool counsel, like, oh, my friend, my divorce, we did this, so you should do it. Like, that's
Mhm.
not helpful. And they also can get very angry and upset, and then you're dealing with their emotions too. So that's tricky. Plus, a lot of our clients come from toxic families of origins. They've been isolated from coercive control, where they don't
There's a
have
lot.
support. Then they have a lawyer, that's another leg of the table, but your lawyer's job is to just advocate for you and be your ally and to translate your case into the law, but not be your therapist. And a lot of us, including me, I became close friends with my attorney that first year. Like that's really expensive and they're not trained to deal with
Yeah.
trauma most of the time. There's other resources. Then we have a therapist or a domestic violence advocate, and I am certified, though we don't do that directly as much in what we do. But that's someone whose job is to help you heal and move
Mhm.
forward. But the problem with some therapists is they don't understand the trauma of having to deal with the family court, and sometimes they give advice that could harm your case, especially with custody, where they say, "Oh, just don't answer the person." We know that can destroy you because one of
Yeah.
the family court's goals is that you're going to try to support that relationship between the child and the other parent. You can't just like, ignore them unless there's,
Yeah.
training or whatever. And then the other part with what Chris and I do in particular is being high conflict divorce coaches. We kind of fill in the gaps between what attorneys are not trained to do, and they usually use logic, and our cases are not logical. And so we use different approaches to try to influence a difficult person to come to the table outside of court if possible. And again, therapists don't understand all of that trauma, and that's what we specialize in. So we have our group and coaching and all of that. But it is something that is not going to end soon. And I think a lot of people think mine is going to be like other people's, and I just want to get it done, and I'm just going to do anything I can to make it end. And you really can't. Like you really have to be strategic and patient, which is just it's torture. So it
Yeah.
requires a lot of support to get through. I mean, divorce itself, requires a lot
It
of support.
does, absolutely. But I love that analogy of the table because I absolutely agree. It takes a team. It's not a
Yeah.
single professional. It's not a single person in your life. You need people helping with different elements, and it's about having that right combination so that you
Right.
are supported because it is a bit of a marathon, and especially if there's many iterations of the lawsuit and various orders that need to be reached, etc. It can last years.
Yes, it usually lasts years.
Would you share with us, Lisa? I think to end on a bit of a positive note, a success story, somebody that you've helped, or maybe it's yourself, but that has managed to get themselves out of the situation.
Yeah, I mean, so what's so cool is this is really awful, and people often when we meet, they'll be like, "Yeah, you've been doing it for 10 years." Like, I can't. But what I love to see is the progress that
Hmm.
happens along the way. It's not always like these huge victories. It's the change that we see in our clients. Like, so we have this hashtag, we call it from puddle to ninja. And
Oh,
so often when we meet someone, they're a mess. They're just like, I'm so scared, my ex is threatening to take the kids away. I'm going to be homeless. Like, and they're saying, and a lot of it is that person's voice is still in their head and they don't
mm,
even know what's true anymore. They
yeah,
can't even look at their orders sometimes because they're like, oh, but my ex is saying this. And so a lot of what we do is like help start with getting that person's voice out of their head
yeah,
and kind of balancing like, okay, what's real and what's not real. And we know being in these relationships, you've often given away without meaning to your authority to somebody else, and you still believe that they are in the right.
yeah.
And one of the other quotes I love is from a friend of ours named Steve, the bodyguard. And he says, an abuser's greatest tool is fear. So a lot of
Hmm.
what we do is we take away the fear by educating our clients on the stuff that actually matters. And so seeing people who are either representing themselves or not, but just like understanding, okay, this is what matters and this is what doesn't matter. And actually, my ex doesn't have a case at all. Like
Yeah,
they
very
over
empowering.
sometimes even a couple weeks, like their facial expression changes and they just like they seem so much calm. Like we had a client, and we have a lot of clients who are like really highly educated professionals. We have like a number of attorneys and mental health politicians, and they're as affected as anyone else. And sometimes they feel an even greater sense of shame because they're so
Wow.
successful in other areas that people are like, you of all, they'll say like, oh, I never thought you would get involved in something like this. And it
Mm,
makes it more painful. And so they
yeah.
feel isolated. So often, so one of our clients who's a politician, when we first met her, like you could see her on Zoom, like she would be holding her breath as we
Mm,
were talking, and kept saying like, I see you, like try to keep breathing, but she was so scared. And this was a same-sex marriage. And
yeah.
so there were two mothers involved, and they had some crazy agreement where they had to keep reviewing the parenting plan every year. So she was constantly engaging with this person who had dictated a lot of what was happening with her life. And just long story short, so we worked together. She came to the support group for a while, but she ended up having an evaluation with a custody evaluation, and
Hmm.
she presented so well. And she had to write certain statements about
Hmm.
the way that they parented. She ended up winning full legal decision making, and it was almost like she couldn't accept that this victory because she still wasn't used to it. And when
Yeah.
the parenting coordinator was meeting, or whoever it was meeting with them after and saying, okay, well, you get to decide this, like with school, like what do you want? She was like, I don't I don't even know because I'm not used to it. So
That's
seeing
true.
the change with her, seeing like some of our clients who left their professions. I'm thinking of a couple of lawyers in particular who were like, now I'm practicing law again. Like I couldn't do it, like, and then we have one client who is like one of our proudest moments, who was this Native American woman who had talked about like bottles being thrown at her face and just terrible, physical abuse, emotional abuse. And her ex hadn't paid child support for years. And
Mm,
she had said, I'm thinking about doing like maybe going back to court, but I can't afford an attorney. Her background was as a teacher. And we said, you've got all these skills. Why don't you
mhm.
go pro se? Like, why don't you just try it? You have nothing to lose except a little bit of time and prep. She did it. She like knocked it out of the park. The judge was so impressed with her that he said, can I have your binder? I'm going to use this to figure out like the amounts of what he owed. She won. She went back. She got restraining orders for herself and the kids. Anyway, she decided that she wanted to become a lawyer, and she's in her no,
Mm,
40s, her 40s.
yeah.
She got into law school. She started law school a year ago, and now she is becoming an attorney, and there's only 2% of attorneys like her in our country. And she's trauma
Amazing.
informed. Yeah, and she's like helping her community. I'm just like, we are so proud of her. I had the opportunity to meet her in real life when we went to California with some of our book launch stuff. And it's like there's so many other stories like that, but that's just the ones that come to mind. But we have so many victories and triumphs along the way.
Yeah.
So it's really, really rewarding.
I think what comes out really loudly from what you're saying is really that preparation and the impact of coming to those legal battles equipped, prepared, emotionally, in control, so that they were really actually credible and powerful, even representing themselves.
Yeah, and if they're not representing themselves, but just understanding like what matters and what doesn't. And so
Yeah.
Chris and I are New Yorkers, and we do what we call the harsh New York reality check, where we'll say like, you can't. So someone will start, they'll work with us and they'll be like, this is what I'm going to do, and I'm going to say this, and I'm going to, blah, 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 and I want the judge to validate, and we're just like, no, that is not going to work. Here's why. Here's what we need to focus on. And they'll be like, but, no, 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 no. We're going to make columns. We're going to. And then sometimes they'll say, what about this? What about, no, no. Oh, but that's a good one. And so
Yeah.
helping them. So part of what we love doing is teaching them how to learn to help themselves. So they start
Hmm.
getting it. And
Yeah.
so even if they have an attorney, we'll say it costs money to throw everything over the fence. Like my car is always messy and I always throw it in the back. I'm like, just sit up front, just throw it in the back seat. Like we do that with attorneys. We'll be like, here's all my documentation. But then it's so expensive and attorneys don't like that because they're like, I'm gonna have to charge this person thousands of dollars just to read it. Like we
Hmm.
don't want our clients to have to spend all that money
Sure.
and
Yeah.
and wasting time and energy. So it's more like, here's the stuff you need, here's why, let's get it together. And then the attorneys are happy. And me being my background is also in education, we always say we want you to be the teacher's pet of clients because if your attorney likes you, they'll do stuff for free. They do.
That's the
Like,
ultimate reward.
yeah, like, don't you want your attorney to love you? Like, we have all, a lot of our clients are good friends. The client we just got off the phone with, who happens to be a New Yorker, was like, oh, I was just talking to another lawyer that we have collaborated with. And I was like, how do you know her? And she said, well, she used to be my attorney and we got to be such good friends. So we're going to the gym together. I was like, what? That's so funny. So that's great.
I agree that having the right expectation, and that's a big part of what I do as well. That when people come into a negotiation without understanding, what's reasonable to request, that's where actually a lot of the trouble that I have with my clients is that when their spouse doesn't have a coach, and sometimes they even have a legal representation, no one's talking sense into them, and so they come to the
Exactly.
conversation completely off the mark. And it's so hard to make them shift from that unless somebody objective says that's not how it works.
Right. And so you're one of those objective people too. I think it's
Yeah,
easier for people sometimes to listen to a coach than an attorney because in their head they're like, their
absolutely.
attorney's just going to take advantage of me. Right.
Yeah,
Sometimes, I mean,
that's a
it's
good point.
unfortunate, but we know that.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. And it's certainly something that I see very much as part of my role, and I'm sure that you do as well.
Yeah.
So, my last question, which I usually ask at the end of my podcast, is for you to share 3 tips. So, if somebody is experiencing legal abuse, what would be your 3 tips to them on how to handle things and to get out of it as fast as they can?
All right. So that's the hard part, is to get out of it as fast. That one of the tips is
Mm,
to accept that you're not going to get out of it that fast.
fair
Um,
enough.
the most important thing, again, is to have support along the way.
Hmm.
Make sure that the professionals that you're working with, you feel like you can trust them. There's a
Hmm.
lot of people who make recommendations. There's a lot of people on social media, and then sometimes our clients have met with them and they made them really uncomfortable. Don't work with people that make you feel uncomfortable. Not that they have to agree with you, but there's so
No,
much like trust issues involved. So you need to
sure.
make sure you have a good rapport with your attorney, because we find sometimes clients repeating the same toxic cycle with their attorney, where they're like
Mm,
walking on eggshells and they're like, my attorney doesn't like me, I'm afraid to ask questions. Like you can't. So getting that support.
yeah.
The second thing is to not approach settlement from a point of desperation,
Mhm.
because that is something that bullies want you to. They will push and push and push and get you to settle. And then when you do, they're going to push more. So
Mm.
you really need to have that support again, of like having your wits about you and being really clear about your goals and what's realistic. Like
Yeah.
nobody really wins in these
Mm.
cases. It's
Yeah.
more of like, a good friend of mine had said, if you can get out and still have a roof over your heads and be okay with your kids, like is maybe that's good enough. And for
Yeah.
me, it was because I was just like, I just want to be done. I didn't want to go to trial and do the whole thing to maybe get more money or more property. I was just like, I'm like,
Yeah,
we're
mental health is
okay.
worth more than that.
Yeah, yeah. Like to really think about that. Um, and now that makes me think of the third tip is to think about something called the cost benefit analysis. How much is it going to cost me, not just in money, but in my time and energy to continue doing this? If
Yeah.
there's something that seems reasonable enough that I can live with, can I accept it and not constantly be bitter and regretful that I should have done something different? But to
Yeah.
also be aware of that before you go into negotiation, because with our clients, their lawyer, everybody's fed up with these cases. And so we say, your own lawyer is going to pressure you to settle. Everyone's going to
Mhm.
pressure you to settle. So you need to be very clear on what you're willing to do that's like the least that you'd be willing to take to get out of it. Like you
Mhm.
need to have certain things in your head so you don't just fall prey and then later find someone like either of us and say like I was coerced into signing an agreement because I wasn't thinking straight. Like that just makes things harder.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
those are great tips, and I totally agree. I think it really is about defining your own version of victory, and it's not relative to the other person. It's what do you need to be able to start your next chapter in decent conditions, and that's something that you define, and that tells you where that bottom line is really.
Yeah.
I love it. Thank you so much, Lisa. It was really nice talking to you, and I appreciate you sharing your story. Such a personal tale, but really powerful. And it looks
Oh,
like you've
thank
made
you.
lemonade. So
Yes.
congratulations.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Chloe.
Take care.
You too.